There are moments in aviation where everything changes in an instant. One second, you're flying a perfectly functioning aircraft, climbing away from the runway, running through normal procedures. The next second, without warning, without any chance to prepare, catastrophic failure tears through your aircraft and suddenly you're fighting for your life. For Greg Biffle, Dennis Dutton, and Jack Dutton, that moment came shortly after takeoff on a cold January morning. An engine didn't just fail, didn't just quit. It violently destroyed itself in a cascade of mechanical devastation that would set in motion a sequence of events that no amount of skill, no perfect decision making, no heroic effort could reverse. Today, we're going to examine exactly what happened inside that engine, why it failed so catastrophically, and why that specific type of failure at that specific moment in that specific aircraft cost Greg Biffle everything. Before we can understand the engine failure that doomed this flight, we need to understand what we're dealing with mechanically. The Cessna Citation 500 series, which includes the Citation 2 involved in this accident, is powered by two Pratt & Whitney JT15D turbofan engines. These aren't massive engines like you'd find on an airliner. Each one produces approximately 2,500 pounds of thrust at takeoff power. For context, that's about the same thrust as a single engine on a small regional jet. But for the Citation, with two of these engines working together, it's adequate power for good performance under normal operations. These engines are mounted on pylons attached to the rear fuselage, one on each side. This aft-mounted configuration is common on business jets. It keeps the engines away from the wings, which allows for cleaner wing aerodynamics. It also positions the engines where their noise is somewhat behind the cabin rather than alongside it. But this positioning has one critical vulnerability that becomes important in our story. The engine intakes are positioned relatively low on the fuselage, and they're located aft of the forward baggage compartments. Remember that detail because it's going to matter enormously. Now let's talk about how a turbofan engine works, because understanding the normal operation helps you understand just how catastrophic this failure was. Air enters the front of the engine through the intake. The first thing that air encounters is the fan section, which is essentially a large multi-blade fan that compresses the incoming air and accelerates it rearward. Some of this air goes around the core of the engine, which is why it's called a turbofan, but some goes into the core, into the compressor section. The compressor section consists of multiple stages of rotating blades that progressively compress the air to very high pressures, typically 10 to 15 times atmospheric pressure. This highly compressed air then enters the combustion section where fuel is injected and ignited. The burning fuel-air mixture expands rapidly, creating extremely high temperature gases, often exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. These hot gases then pass through the turbine section, which extracts energy from the hot gas flow to drive the compressor and fan at the front of the engine. Finally, the exhaust gases exit the rear of the engine at high velocity, producing thrust. This entire process happens continuously while the engine is running, thousands of pounds of air flowing through per second. Rotating components spinning at tens of thousands of RPM, precisely controlled fuel injection and combustion, temperatures and pressures that would destroy most materials. It's an incredibly sophisticated, precisely balanced system, and like all precisely balanced systems, it's vulnerable to anything that disrupts that balance. Jet engines are designed to ingest air, clean air, smooth air, nothing but air. They have screens and separators to remove rain and ice. They're designed to handle birds to a certain extent, though bird strikes still cause damage, but they are absolutely not designed to ingest solid foreign objects, particularly large, dense objects like luggage or tools or debris. When something solid enters a jet engine at high speed, the results are catastrophic and nearly instantaneous. Based on the physical evidence from the crash site, particularly photographs showing severe damage to the right engine and the conspicuous absence of the right-hand nose baggage door, investigators and analysts have developed a theory about what caused the engine failure. The theory, supported by precedent from similar accidents and by the specific pattern of damage, is that the right nose baggage compartment door came open shortly after takeoff. When that door opened at high speed, at over 150 knots with tremendous airflow and pressure differential, items stored inside that compartment were violently sucked out. And here's where the aircraft design becomes critical. The location of that baggage door, positioned forward and slightly below the right engine intake, means that anything expelled from that compartment has a high probability of being ingested directly into the right engine. It's almost as if the door and the engine intake are aligned for this exact failure mode. Items come out of the door, get caught in the airflow, and go straight into the engine. Now, let me walk you through what happens inside a jet engine when it ingests a foreign object, because the sequence is both fascinating from an engineering standpoint and absolutely terrifying from a safety standpoint. Let's say a piece of luggage or a bag, something with real mass and density, enters the engine intake at over 150 knots. Within a fraction of a second, that object strikes the fan blades at the front of the engine. These fan blades are engineering marvels. They're typically made of titanium alloy or advanced composite materials. They're precisely shaped for aerodynamic efficiency. They're balanced to incredible tolerances, and they're spinning at thousands of RPM with the blade tips moving at supersonic speeds. When one of these blades, moving at perhaps 600 miles per hour at the tip, strikes a solid object, the kinetic energy involved is enormous. Despite being made of titanium, despite being incredibly strong, the blade can't withstand that kind of impact. The blade bends, or it cracks, or it shatters completely, depending on where and how it's struck. And when one blade fails, the engine is suddenly massively out of balance. Imagine a car tire with a huge weight attached to one side, spinning at high speed. The vibration would be severe. In a jet engine with components spinning at tens of thousands of RPM, the imbalance is catastrophic. That imbalance often causes adjacent blades to fail as well. The vibration can crack blade roots. The flexing can exceed material limits. Within a second or less, you can go from a full set of fan blades to half of them destroyed, but the destruction doesn't stop there. The pieces of those shattered blades, chunks of titanium weighing ounces or pounds, become projectiles. Some are thrown forward, potentially punching through the engine inlet cowling and striking the aircraft structure. Others are thrown radially outward, potentially breaching the engine case. But many pieces are thrown rearward, accelerated by the airflow into the compressor section. These projectiles, traveling at hundreds of miles per hour, strike the compressor blades. Compressor blades are more delicate than fan blades because they're designed for aerodynamic efficiency rather than mechanical strength. When they're struck by debris, they shatter. Multiple stages of compressor blades can be destroyed in sequence. As the debris cascade continues rearward through the engine, the destruction continues into the combustion section. Fuel nozzles are damaged or destroyed. Igniters are broken. The combustion liner, the structure that contains the burning fuel-air mixture, can be breached. Debris continues downstream into the turbine section, striking the turbine blades that extract energy from the hot gas flow. These blades operate at extreme temperatures and are already near their stress limits. When struck by debris, they fail. From initial impact to complete engine destruction takes approximately 2 to 3 seconds. 2 to 3 seconds from a functioning engine producing maximum thrust to a destroyed engine producing zero thrust and possibly on fire. The cockpit indications of this failure are immediate and overwhelming. Engine RPM drops precipitously towards zero or becomes wildly erratic. Exhaust gas temperature spikes as unburned fuel passes through the damaged combustion section. Oil pressure drops as the oil system is compromised. Fuel flow drops to zero as the engine control system responds to the RPM loss. And simultaneously, multiple warning systems activate. Master warning lights illuminate. Master caution lights illuminate. If there's fire or if the engine monitoring system detects temperatures or conditions consistent with fire, engine fire warnings activate, adding a loud, continuous warning tone to the cacophony. All of this happens essentially simultaneously. The crew doesn't get a gradual buildup of warnings, allowing them to anticipate and prepare. They go from normal operations to a cockpit full of red lights and alarms in the space of 2 heartbeats. But the warnings, as overwhelming as they are actually secondary to the physical sensation of the failure. When one engine on a twin-engine aircraft suddenly loses all thrust while the other continues producing power, the aircraft experiences a violent sudden yaw. The asymmetric thrust creates an enormous turning moment. If the right engine fails, the aircraft yaws hard to the right. If not immediately corrected with opposite rudder, this yaw can quickly become uncontrollable, potentially leading to a spin. Put yourself in that cockpit for a moment. You've just taken off. You're climbing through maybe 1,000 or 1,500 feet. Everything is normal. You're probably relaxed, running checklists, maybe making a radio call. And then, without any warning, there's a tremendous bang or series of bangs. The aircraft violently yaws to one side. The panel erupts in red lights. Alarms are blaring. You have perhaps 1 second to recognize what's happening and begin responding before the situation becomes unrecoverable. The immediate response drilled into pilots during training is to maintain aircraft control above all else. If the aircraft yaws right, you immediately stomp on the left rudder to counteract that yaw. You verify your airspeed is above minimum control speed, the speed below which you cannot maintain directional control with asymmetric thrust. You keep the wings level. You maintain a safe pitch attitude. Only after you've stabilized the aircraft, only after you're certain you're not about to stall or spin or lose control, only then do you start diagnosing what failed and what you need to do about it. And this is where human factors and crew coordination become critically important. The standard procedure for an engine failure is extensive and time-consuming. You have to identify which engine failed, verify the failure by checking multiple instruments, begin the memory items for engine failure, which include things like throttling back the failed engine, verifying directional control, maintaining speed. Then you pull out the written checklist and methodically work through the complete engine shutdown procedure. That procedure includes closing the fuel shutoff valve, turning off igniters, discharging fire extinguishers if there's a fire indication, reconfiguring electrical systems because you've lost a generator, reconfiguring hydraulic systems, reconfiguring pressurization systems. Depending on the aircraft, this can be 30 or 40 individual steps. And the assumption in the procedure design is that one pilot is flying the aircraft while another pilot is running the checklist and managing systems. But what if you don't effectively have two pilots? What if the person in the right seat doesn't have the training or experience to run that checklist? What if they've never actually dealt with an engine failure before, never been through the procedure in the aircraft? Then the pilot in command has to do everything, fly the aircraft with asymmetric thrust, manage all the systems, run the checklist from memory or while trying to read it, make all the decisions. That workload, especially in an emergency with adrenaline and stress, can quickly exceed human capability. And the workload is made even worse by uncertainty. In those first seconds after the failure, the crew might not know exactly what happened. They know something catastrophic occurred. They know they've lost an engine. But do they know why? Do they know if there's additional damage? Do they know if the situation is stable or getting worse? If the baggage door is open? If there's wind noise and vibration from that? If items are possibly still being expelled and ingested? The crew might be uncertain whether they've had one discrete failure or whether they have ongoing problems. That uncertainty drives a powerful psychological need to get the aircraft on the ground immediately. If you don't know whether the aircraft is going to stay together, whether you might lose the other engine, whether fire might spread, the overwhelming instinct is to land now, as quickly as possible before anything else goes wrong, and the airport is right there behind you. You just took off from there. Turning around and landing seems like the obvious, safe choice. But here's the tragic irony. That instinct, that decision to return immediately, is often what converts a survivable emergency into a fatal accident. Because returning immediately means you're operating at low altitude with minimal time to work the problem. You're maneuvering instead of stabilizing. You're rushing instead of being methodical. You're committing to a very narrow window of success with almost no margin for error. The recommended procedure, taught and practiced and proven to save lives, is different. When you lose an engine shortly after takeoff, you don't turn around immediately. You continue climbing. You get to 3,000 or 4,000 feet minimum. At that altitude, you can engage autopilot, which can fly the aircraft safely on one engine for hours. You can run checklists completely and carefully. You can declare an emergency with air traffic control and coordinate for vectors to an appropriate airport. You can brief an approach. You can configure at the right time instead of early. You have time, which gives you options, which gives you safety. But that procedure requires overriding powerful instincts. It requires trusting that the aircraft will keep flying on one engine. It requires accepting that you're going to be in an emergency state for 20 or 30 minutes instead of getting on the ground in 5 minutes. And if you haven't trained extensively for this specific scenario, if you haven't internalized through practice that climbing away is correct, your instinct will win. You'll turn back. And in many cases, that decision is what kills you. In the Biffle accident, based on the available flight track data, the decision was made to return to the departure airport immediately. The aircraft climbed to approximately 2,000 feet, then began maneuvering back toward Statesville. And we have direct evidence that the crew configured for landing relatively early. We have audio, actual radio transmission from the aircraft. This is Jack Dutton speaking. Took off runway 10. We've got an issue here. We're getting everything going. We're getting our gear down. We're getting our gear down. They're extending landing gear while still maneuvering, while still trying to get back to the airport. And in a citation, operating on one engine at high weight, extending landing gear commits your energy state. The citation manual explicitly states the aircraft cannot maintain altitude with gear down and flaps extended on one engine at maximum weight. Once that gear extends, you're descending. Physics determines your descent rate. The only question is whether you have enough altitude to reach the runway. They didn't. They impacted 1,800 feet short, 10 seconds of flight time from the runway. But those 10 seconds required altitude they'd already spent on the turnback, spent on maneuvering at low altitude, spent on early configuration. The engine blow started the emergency, but the decisions made after the engine blow determined the outcome. And here's what makes this so tragic. This exact scenario has happened before and had completely different outcomes. In 2024, a citation departing Barranquilla experienced the same failure. Baggage door opened, items ingested, engine destroyed. That crew climbed to altitude, followed procedures, and landed safely. Everyone survived, and the difference wasn't the mechanical failure, the difference was the response. The engine blow cost Greg Biffle everything because it happened at the worst possible moment at low altitude shortly after takeoff. But engine failures at that moment are survivable. They're trained for. There are procedures. The difference between survival and death comes down to the decisions made in those first critical minutes. Climb or turn back. Configure early or delay. Rush or be methodical. Greg Biffle was a champion. He understood risk management, preparation, the importance of having margin. But in that cockpit, facing a catastrophic failure in an aircraft with different performance than he might have expected, the decisions made didn't preserve margin. They consumed it. And when the margin was gone, so were the options. If you're a pilot, especially if you fly multi-engine aircraft, learn from this. When the engine blows, climb first, get altitude, get time, get options, then make decisions from safety, not desperation. That's how you survive the engine blow that could cost you everything. Subscribe to this channel for more in-depth aviation analysis. Share this with pilots you know, and fly safe, always.